In previous videos on this channel, we have discussed some of the most infamous and enormous predatory birds from prehistory, most notably the infamous Dagots Eagle from New Zealand, to the giant Furusrakids or terror birds, and of course the immense Argentavis from South America. I also tapped into some other less well-known prehistoric raptorial birds, most notably Hierrax from the island of Cuba, and the similarly sized Dagots Eagle from North America. However, the range of extinct predatory birds, specifically ancient birds of prey and owls, is exceptionally varied considering their long history, with many other species of ancient birds of prey and owls becoming exceptionally large and strange-looking in their own regard. So from an unusually large ground-dwelling species of extinct Carakara to possibly the largest owl the world has ever seen, here are 10 extinct raptorial birds you may have never heard of. Modern owl species do vary greatly in size, with some of the smallest species being among the smallest of all carnivorous birds alive today, while the largest can rival some eagle species in size. In the modern day, the 3 owl species most commonly recognized as being among the largest in the world are the great grey owl, the Blakiston's fish owl, and pictured here, the Eurasian eagle owl. The great grey owl is typically described as being the largest in terms of body length from beak to tail, reaching typically over a metre, whereas the Blakiston's and Eurasian eagle owl are usually pretty close when it comes to maximum body weight and wingspan size, with larger individuals having wingspans of up to 6 foot across and weighing up to 8.8 pounds in body weight. As large and powerful as these great birds are, however, they pale in comparison to the body size of the largest owl that ever lived. This is Ornimegalonyx, the Cuban giant owl, sometimes referred to as the giant running owl. An extinct species native to the island of Cuba, this giant owl is believed by many to be the largest that we know of in existence. This remarkable and fearsome species thrived on the island of Cuba until at least the late Pleistocene, where it lived alongside a range of other unusual animals, big and small. The size of Ornimegalonyx is quite extraordinary, and it would have been quite the alarming sight in real life, standing at least over 3.5 foot tall or more. This owl had unusually long legs in relation to its body size and a short tail, making it vaguely resemble a gigantic burrowing owl even though it was not closely related, hinting at a similar lifestyle. The long and powerful legs and feet of Ornimegalonyx would have likely made it a strong runner and adept walker on the ground, but unlike the comparatively dainty burrowing owl, this bird was exceptionally bulky and robust in its build, with recent estimates for Ornimegalonyx's body weight ranging between 9 and 14 kilograms. The great size of this bird, combined with its adaptations for hunting more on the ground, hence its long legs, as well as the fact that this bird had a reduced keel or breastbone along with relatively short wings, indicated that it was likely flightless or at the very least near flightless. It is somewhat uncertain whether this giant owl was a strictly nocturnal or partially nocturnal or crepuscular hunter in life, though it is almost certain it would have hunted much like most other owl species, using its superb vision and hearing to locate its prey. The island of Cuba in this point in time was quite the extraordinary place to see, with a variety of extraordinary creatures other than the owl itself also being present here. The beaches of the island were inhabited by monk seals, and the forests by ground sloths, some of which as big as a black bear. These unique creatures were all under the shadow of the gigantic eagle-like raptor Hierrax, as we have discussed in a previous video, which was almost certainly the apex predator of the island during the day at least. For when these island inhabitants weren't being hunted by the giant eagle-like raptor during the day, they were almost certainly having to contend with the giant owl. Ornimegalonyx was a formidable predator in life, hunting a wide range of other animals on the island, This prey range likely included a variety of ground-dwelling mammals, including solenodons, as well as some species of rodents on the island, some of which could reach up to the size of a capybara. This immense predatory owl may have even hunted some of the ground sloths present on the island of Cuba at the time, some of which, as previously mentioned, could reach up to the size of a black bear. Ornimegalonyx's main killing weapons were its very large and powerful feet and talons, which could grip prey with incredible force. It likely stalked its prey on foot and then pounced on it, taking it by surprise, using its razor-sharp talons to aim for vital areas such as the prey's skull, as is seen with many modern owls today. These formidable weapons, combined with the owl's great size, made it one of the dominant predators on the island of Cuba alongside Hierrax, thriving until the end of the Pleistocene epoch, with remains indicating that they likely died out sometime around 11,000 years ago. The Cuban giant owl was not the only species of extinct owl once present in the New World, for another giant species also lived in the Caribbean. This is Titopollens, or the Bahamas Giant Owl, a gigantic relative of modern barn owls which could reach up to 1 meter tall and was almost as big as the previously mentioned Ornimegalonyx. The size of a large eagle, this huge species used to live in old-growth pine forest on what is now the Bahamas until at least as recently as the last ice age. Unlike the previously mentioned Cuban giant owl, which physically most closely resembled a gigantic burrowing owl despite lacking a close phylogenetic relationship, Titopollens was physically almost identical to a modern barn owl except for the size. It is believed that this species likely colonized the Bahamas in at least the last 400,000 years, during a glacial period when particularly low sea levels made the islands more accessible to this bird. It is actually believed that the historical presence of this great owl in the Bahamas was the inspiration behind the legend of the Chick Charney, a mischievous goblin-like creature with 3 toes and the ability to turn its head all the way around. Many popular online sources refer to Titopollens as being a giant flightless owl, but in reality, unlike Ornimegalonyx, it actually had large robust wings and could probably fly quite well, much like a giant version of its modern relatives. Fossil evidence indicates that this great bird mostly hunted a species of large rodent endemic to the island as the mainstay of its diet, and considering its similarities with modern barn owls despite its great size, it seems almost certain it hunted them in exactly the same way as well. Caracaras are an intelligent and opportunistic family of predatory birds which resemble hawks in many ways, but in fact are more closely related to falcons. Many species, particularly the crested and striated caracaras, are among the most resourceful birds around and are both active predators and scavengers, being quite happy to find prey on the wing as they are on the ground, where their long legs are well adapted for walking and foraging. For this next extinct species, we're going to remain in the Caribbean, specifically on the island of Jamaica, for it was once home to an extinct relative of modern caracaras that was quite unique in many ways. The Jamaican Caracara was similar in size to, if not slightly larger, than the biggest caracaras alive today, but was considerably heftier in build with comparatively even longer legs. This would have almost certainly made this bird even more of an adept runner and walker on the ground than its modern relatives, for caracaras are well known today in being such effective hunters on the ground as well as in the air. As well as being proportionally taller and heavier in its build, the wings of the Jamaican Caracara were also reduced enough to mean that it was either completely flightless or at the very least a weak flyer in comparison to its modern relatives. This unique species of extinct raptor lived alongside a range of other strange animals and birds, most notably the extinct Xenus ibis, an ibis which literally had club-like wings. As previously mentioned, modern caracaras are exceptionally smart and opportunistic birds, regularly scavenging the dead bodies of other animals, but also being very adept hunters, able to take a wide range of prey with their sharp taloned feet, as well as being unusually social among many other birds of prey species. Considering what we know about modern Caracara species in their behaviour and anatomy, it's therefore not entirely unreasonable to imagine that the Jamaican Caracara was much the same as these modern Caracaras, only slightly more terrestrial in its habits, and slightly larger as well. Likely being one of the top predators and scavengers on the island of Jamaica at the time, this fierce and intelligent carnivore likely saw many of the other birds and animals on the island, including the previously mentioned Xenocybis, as a potential source of prey. As a brief side note, this extinct species of large Caracara reminds me a lot of the fictionalised Carakilla, a giant flightless carnivorous bird present in the documentary series The Future is Wild. This fun and interesting series theorises how modern animals may evolve in the future, and in this context, the Carakilla is theorised to be a descendant of modern Caracaras that grew much larger and became a flightless predator once again. This coincidentally makes them very similar to the prehistoric real-life Phurus rachids or terror birds as we have discussed in a previous video, which is interesting considering that in real life, terror birds are actually considered to be related to falcons and caracaras after Seriemus, their closest living relatives. Woodward's eagle is an extinct species of prehistoric raptorial bird that I have discussed in detail on a previous video. This huge carnivorous raptor lived in what is now North America until as recently as the late Pleistocene, and was enormous in size, nearly as big as the infamous Haast's eagle from New Zealand. It turns out, however, that this gigantic avian hunter was not alone in its environment at the time, and actually had a smaller but even stranger looking relative living alongside it. The Dagots or walking eagle, scientifically referred to as Buteogallus dagoti, was another species of peculiar bird of prey living in North America at this time. Remains of this extinct bird have been found in the La Brea tar pits and also in the Carpinteria lagerstadt in southern California. In life, this bird's habitats likely included grasslands, marshlands, as well as brushy savannas and ponds. Based on its skeletal remains, the likely size of this bird in real life was clearly not as big as Woodward's eagle, but still fairly large, about a metre in body length, and a likely maximum wingspan size of over 196 centimetres across. Despite its common name, the Dagots eagle was actually part of the Buteogallus family, which includes living species of raptor including the savanna hawk pictured here, which is theorised by many to be its likely closest relative alive today. The Dagots eagle, however, was up to 40% larger than the average modern savanna hawk and had proportionally much longer legs as shown by its preserved remains. Analysis of the limb bones belonging to Dagots eagle have shown that compared to most other modern raptors including hawks and eagles, Dagots eagle had relatively little lifting power in their legs in comparison, and their feet didn't seem to be able to grasp quite as effectively. Furthermore, analysis of muscle attachments to the tarsal point in the bird's legs indicates a strong walking proficiency, suggesting that this bird spent much of its time hunting on the ground, hinting at a lifestyle much like that of the modern-day African secretary bird. Secretary birds are certainly capable flyers, but much of their hunting is on the ground, where they use their very long and powerful legs to roam across open savanna and essentially stamp small animals such as snakes and lizards to death with their strong taloned feet. It seems very likely then that the Dagots eagle would have hunted in much the same kind of way, patrolling over open ground in Pleistocene North America, surrounded by a range of infamous prehistoric animals, stomping and kicking small prey to death with its powerful legs and feet. Gargano is a region in southeastern Italy with a long and interesting history, particularly when it comes to the fauna of its ancient past. Between 12 and 4 million years ago, during the late Miocene to early Pliocene, an array of unique and strange animals called what was then Gargano Island home, which was formed due to sea levels being higher back then than they are today. This range of bizarre wildlife included Garganornis, a gigantic flightless relative of modern-day geese and ducks, weighing up to 15 to 22 kilograms. The mammals on this island were also bizarre, including Hoplitomeryx, a strange deer-like animal with bizarre horns on its skull. Alongside strange herbivores such as this, there were also others including Dinogalirix, which was a strange relative of modern-day hedgehogs and moonrats, which was probably mostly insectivorous, but may have occasionally also hunted small vertebrates as well. And preying on most of these animals on this island at the time was likely the dominant predator of the island, Garganoetus, or as it's dubbed, the Gargano Island Eagle. This powerful predator was similar in size to many modern golden eagles, and various fossil materials of this extinct bird dating from the late Miocene onwards have been found in the Gargano Peninsula. With Gargano Island historically being home to a wide range of mammals, birds and reptiles, as we've briefly mentioned, Garganoetus had a wide range of prey to choose from and was certainly well adapted to living in this insular environment. With its large size and powerful talons, Garganoetus was an apex predator within its ecosystem, likely being able to hunt many of the other mammals and birds that called the island home. Eventually, however, it is believed that various changes, most notably changes in the climate and also in sea levels, had various negative effects on the island inhabitants. Difficulties in adapting to the changes in environmental conditions over time, along with reduction in food availability, is what most likely led to the extinction of Garganoetus and the other strange inhabitants of this bizarre island. Yet another unusually large owl species endemic to an island, the prehistoric Cretan owl, was native to, as you may have guessed, the island of Crete in the Pleistocene. Mainland Eurasia today is home to the little owl, which is the closest living relative to the now extinct Cretan owl. This species is one of the smallest owls native to the continent, being barely over 20 centimeters long. The Cretan owl is actually believed to be a descendant of the little owl on the mainland, but is much larger, over 3 times larger in fact than the modern little owl, standing upright at over 60 centimeters tall. An interesting side note is that these birds belong to the genus known as Athene, which is a reference to the Greek goddess Athena, which is made interesting considering how she was often depicted being associated with these birds, therefore coincidentally matching up with the geographical location of this now extinct owl. The Cretan owl lived alongside a range of other unusual species, including the Cretan otter, a more robustly built version of today's smooth-coated otters. There was also Candia cervus, an unusual-looking species of deer endemic to the island. As well as being much larger than the continental little owl, the Cretan owl also had proportionally longer legs than its smaller relative, which, although proportionally was still not as long as those of the burrowing owl, are still long enough to hint at a somewhat more terrestrial lifestyle, along with a few other anatomical characteristics. Preserved pellets of this unique owl species suggest that the mainstay of its diet was made up of the endemic mouse species Mus minotaurus on the island, though like modern little owls, it may have also fed on insects given the chance. Then again, its larger body size also indicates the potential ability to hunt even larger prey. The beautiful Sal Miguel Island is located in the archipelago of the Azores in the North Atlantic Ocean, just off the coast of Portugal. This isolated location was once the home of yet another species of island-dwelling owl, which was also adapted for a semi-terrestrial lifestyle, the Sal Miguel Scops owl. It was a relatively small species, standing at around 18 centimeters tall, and would have likely resembled the Eurasian Scops owl still alive today, but with some crucial anatomical differences. For one thing, the Sal Miguel Scops owl had considerably shorter wings than those of the Eurasian species, around 2/3 the size, indicating that it was a poor flyer in comparison. It also had proportionally longer legs than its mainland relatives, up to 12% longer in relation to its body size, further indicating its more terrestrial lifestyle, spending more of its time hunting and perching on the ground. Interestingly, Sal Miguel had no native mammals or reptiles of its own at the time, so the majority of this small owl's diet likely consisted of small invertebrates such as insects or spiders on the ground, while it was itself potentially prey for larger predatory birds. This species actually survived until much more recently compared to most of the other birds on this list, dying out at around the 15th century, likely caused because of humans arriving on the island and introducing invasive species while also causing habitat destruction. The Jer Falcon is one of the most striking birds to be found in the Northern Hemisphere, a truly well-adapted species for life in the cold. For centuries, this impressive falcon has been revered as the bird reserved for royalty within the sport of falconry, a powerful and impressive hunter, often used to hunt some of the larger and more challenging kinds of avian and ground game. They are also on average the largest falcon in the world, with specimens ranging from 800 to 1800 grams in weight, varying of course between males and females. What some may not realise, however, is that there was once a paleo subspecies of this mighty falcon in the past, which may have been an even more impressive animal in some ways. Fossils dating from the late Pleistocene have been found in North America, specifically in locations including Little Box Elder Cave in Wyoming and Dark Canyon Cave in New Mexico. These remains confirm that there was once a variant of Jer Falcon which used to call these areas home during the last ice ages. These ancient Jer Falcons are referred to as Swarth's Jer Falcons and would have been around the same size as some of the larger individuals seen today, with some of the strongest females being even larger still. Interestingly, these ancient Jer Falcons also differed slightly in their ecological ways to the modern American Jer Falcons, being somewhat more adapted to a somewhat more temperate semi-arid environment, features that were surprisingly widespread across their range during the last ice age. These ice age steppe inhabiting populations of Jer Falcon likely lived in an ecological manner more like that of modern Siberian Jer Falcon populations today, and also American prairie falcons in some regard. Their diet would have likely consisted mostly of land-living birds and mammals, compared to the modern American Jer Falcons, which feed more on birds both from the land and also at the coast. The larger size of these ancient Jer Falcons may be because of the fact they had simply a larger food supply at the time, though it's more likely that the reason they were larger is simply as a result of Bergmann's rule, for the larger you are, the more heat you retain in cold conditions. Most are aware of the mighty Dagots Eagle, the largest and most powerful eagle we know of in existence, for this is yet another popular species I've done a video on previously. But as immense as it was, the Dagots Eagle was not the only unusually big raptor native to the island of New Zealand in the ancient past, for there was another raptor which, although not as big, was certainly large compared to its modern relatives. Nowadays, there are only two species of diurnal birds of prey native to the islands of New Zealand, the New Zealand falcon and the New Zealand swamp harrier. The swamp harrier was not the only species of harrier once native to New Zealand, however, as there was another species that grew even larger, the Isles's harrier. In fact, it is now believed that the swamp harrier only made it to New Zealand after the Isles's harrier became extinct, basically filling in the role it left behind after it died out. Furthermore, phylogenetic analysis suggests that the closest living relative of the Isles's harrier is the Australian spotted harrier, from which it diverged from around 2.4 million years ago. Isles's harriers were large birds, especially by harrier standards, with larger individuals having wingspans over 6 foot across and weighing up to 3 kilograms, making them comparable in size to a small golden eagle. Modern harrier species, including the still living swamp harrier, are known for having a relatively lightweight yet still strong build, with long broad wings and a long tail, making them both strong and buoyant flyers. Most species hunt by flying relatively slowly over open ground, scanning below for prey using their keen vision. In the case of the modern swamp and marsh harriers, Wetland habitats are typically preferred, hence their name. Many species will often hunt quite small prey in relation to their body size, such as small rodents and other mammals, but with their strong taloned feet, larger species, including the UK marsh harrier and particularly the New Zealand swamp harrier, are capable of sometimes taking birds closer to their own body size, including larger water birds and even sometimes mammals ranging up to the size of a rabbit or hare. Considering its even larger body size, the Isles' harrier almost certainly hunted its prey in much the same way as the modern swamp harrier, only on a larger scale, more frequently being able to take prey weighing over a few kilograms, although bearing in mind, mammalian prey was not present on New Zealand until more recently in history, so much of its prey originally was probably birds. A common reoccurring theme you may have noticed in this video is that many of these extinct raptors are essentially giant versions of their modern smaller relatives, particularly if they're on islands. This is a case of island gigantism, where species from the mainland, especially relatively small species, can become gigantic in the presence of more food on an island, as well as fewer sources of competition or predation. Isles' harrier eventually became extinct sometime after the Polynesians arrived at New Zealand, though it definitely seems to have survived a bit longer since the arrival than the Bahamas Eagle did. The early history of the falcon family is somewhat mysterious, though what we do know through phylogenetic evidence is that they are closely related to parrots and perching birds, as well as seriemas and in turn the terror birds. The fossil record consisting of early species within this family group is fairly limited, as is with many species in the past, although there are some fragmentary species that are known from relatively recently found remains. For the final species on this list, we're going to take a trip closer to home, in the UK in fact, most specifically the London Clay Formation in Essex, England. In 2022, a new species of predatory bird from the ancient past was described from this formation. It has been named Daniel's Raptor forrestrakioides. Daniel's raptor lived far earlier than any other bird featured on this list, during the early Eocene, around 55 million years ago, which is not that long after the death of the non-avian dinosaurs. Although Daniel's raptor is known from relatively fragmentary remains, scientists have a pretty good idea of what the bird actually looked like in life. For instance, the ulna, one of the bones present in the wing, seems to be well developed in Daniel's raptor, hinting it was a good flyer, and it also had proportionally long legs and a long tail, much like modern Carakaras. These are indications that Daniel's raptor may have looked and maybe even hunted much like modern Carakaras, which are themselves part of the Falconidae family. However, Daniel's raptor also had an unusually large and well-developed hooked beak, sharing many convergent similarities with the infamous terror birds, a fact that is referenced in its species name, forrestrakioides. With physical features similar to that of both falcons and Carakaras, as well as terror birds and their close relatives seriemas, it seems to suggest that the common ancestor of both of these groups was in fact a long-legged, mostly ground-hunting predator, which over time led to the increased diversification and specialization of birds resembling modern Carakaras and falcons today, along with their close relatives. I recently discussed 10 extinct species of birds of prey and owls throughout the world that don't seem to get as much attention as other prehistoric species. This list included species such as the giant Cuban owl Ornimegalonyx, along with Isles' harrier from New Zealand, and a whole host of other unique species, including various island giants. However, the amount of extinct species of birds, specifically birds of prey and owls for the purpose of this video, is so extensive that I can make yet another video of 10 unique species that many have not heard of before. So, from a species of eagle native to Madagascar that hunted lemurs in the ancient past, to a species of owl only found on the islands of New Zealand and died out so recently that it was captured in photographs, and an Ice Age species of undescribed owl so gigantic it dwarfed all modern species. Here are 10 extinct birds of prey and owls you may have never heard of before, Part 2. In the previous video on this subject, one of the species mentioned was Daniel's raptor, an extinct ancestor of modern falcons and caracaras whose remains were found in southern England. This peculiar-looking ancestor lived around 55 million years ago in the early Eocene epoch, so not long after the death of the non-avian dinosaurs, which occurred around 66 million years ago. Although Daniel's raptor is known from very fragmentary remains, there is in fact another very closely related species of bird, which is known for more numerous and more complete remains than Daniel's raptor, therefore providing us with more information on this ancient lineage of birds. This very similar looking fossil bird is known as Maciloraptor. Maciloraptor seems to be a slightly younger species of bird than Daniel's raptor, living in the Middle Eocene, a period of time between 47.8 and 38 million years ago. Only one species of Maciloraptor is so far known, and the species itself is only known so far from 2 specimens, both of which are nearly complete. The name Maciloraptor refers to the old town of Messel in Germany, which is where the remains of this extinct bird were found in the first place. More specifically, the remains were found in the Messel Pit Formation, which is one of the richest fossil sites in the world, with over 1,000 species of both animals and plants preserved in the formation. Dating from the early Eocene epoch itself, many of the fossils found here are exquisitely preserved, with many specimens having the outlines of their bodies still visible, and some having the remains of their final meal embedded in their stomachs. The Eocene epoch was a period in Earth's history where many animals, especially relatively small ones, began to greatly expand in terms of ecological diversity since the death of the non-avian dinosaurs. These included many primitive ancestors of modern animals we find more familiar. For example, this is the fossil of an ancient horse, which had 4 distinct toes on each foot and would have barely stood taller than a spaniel. Other mammalian species, such as ancestral anteaters, and even early primates, likely resembling modern bush babies and lemurs, began to take to the trees and adopt an arboreal lifestyle. Smaller insect-eating mammals were also abundant on the ground, along with early rodent-like species, resembling modern-day rats and mice, with some species even resembling modern-day squirrels. With so many of these small mammals running around, it seems of little surprise then that in response, various species of bird began to adapt in order to take advantage of this new food opportunity. And it's very possible that Maciloraptor was among these birds. The remains of Maciloraptor may still not be quite as well preserved as some of the previous animals I've discussed from these pits, but it certainly can tell us a lot about how this bird may have looked and behaved in life. Along with Daniel's raptor, Maciloraptor is believed to be a long-legged relative of modern-day falcon species, with both anatomical differences and similarities to these modern raptors. To start with, it had quite a long and narrow beak, with a shallow curve just towards the tip of the upper mandible. This is quite different from the beak shape seen in modern larger falcon species, which typically have a shorter, stouter beak with a more pronounced hook, and also the presence of the tomial tooth on the upper mandible, which gives them a more powerful and effective bite when subduing prey. Maciloraptor also had unusually long legs for its size, with the tibiotarsus being the longest bone in its leg, and it also had relatively short toes on its feet. This primitive raptor also had comparatively smaller and weaker talons on its feet than most modern larger falcons. For some species, such as the peregrine for example, pictured here, have proportionally very long, powerful toes and larger, sharper talons designed to withstand tremendous impact in dispatching prey. The more gracile build combined with the long legs of Maciloraptor indicates it may have hunted closer to the ground, and in terms of its physical appearance, it seems to have more in common with modern Carakaras, who themselves are part of the falconiform family tree. Raptor may have potentially hunted small mammals on the ground, much like these birds in this regard, chasing small prey across short distances on the wing and maybe even occasionally on foot given the chance. Interestingly, it seems that Raptor was not the only species of smaller predatory bird around at this time in the Messel Formation, for there are also fossils, very well preserved that is, of a very early species of owl, Paleoglox. This small early species of owl may have also hunted the very small rodents and reptiles roaming on the ground at the time in the forested habitats of the early Eocene, along with larger insects. These two different species found in the same location are some of the earliest known species of fossilized birds of prey and owls known in the world, and they provide an interesting comparison between themselves and their distant descendants alive today. Moving on now from the Eocene to the Oligocene epoch for the next species. This portrait depicts a very small ancient bird of prey from this time period, known as Aviaptor. Some fairly well preserved remains of Aviaptor have been found in Poland, and the species itself was named and described in 2020. These remains do indeed date to the Oligocene epoch, precisely around 31 to 30 million years ago. The fossils show that this was a small bird with slender proportions and long legs, which is referenced by its scientific name, Aviaptor longicus, which roughly translates to long-legged bird thief. Aviaptor was especially small for a bird of prey, with a body size comparable to that of some of the smallest known sparrowhawk species alive today. It likely closely resembled these small accipiters in both size and appearance in life, with long slender legs and long narrow toes, suggesting it was an adept bird hunter, though it seemed to also share some physical characteristics with modern-day harrier hawks. However, despite these similarities with modern-day accipiters, especially smaller species, it seems that Aviaptor was not directly related to these birds, as it seems to be a much more ancient kind of raptor, living 30 to 31 million years ago, whereas true accipitrines are believed to have appeared 16 to 18 million years ago. There also appears to be some anatomical differences between Aviaptor and modern-day accipiters, including the proportions of the second toe on the foot, and also the shape of the humerus, the upper arm or wing bone. As I briefly touched on earlier, Aviaptor was found to have proportionally long legs and slender toes for its size, which indicates a small raptor well designed for hunting other birds, and it just so happens that Aviaptor was a contemporary to some of the earliest known passerines or perching birds, and even some early hummingbird species, indicating that this might be, possibly, the earliest known species of bird-hunting raptor in the fossil record that we know of. Many are familiar with the crested Carakara, a highly intelligent and resourceful raptor found in the southern United States and also into Central and South America. Mexico's Guadalupe Island once had a Caracara species of its own, which was extremely similar to modern crested Caracaras, but is sadly no more. The Guadalupe Caracara was very similar in appearance to the living crested Caracara, once being considered to be a subspecies of the living crested Caracara before being reinstated as its own species in 2000. Much like its modern relatives, it was almost certainly a highly intelligent bird, which was able to both hunt for live prey using its taloned feet, and also scavenge carcasses given the opportunity. In 1876, this species of Caracara was common throughout the island, but shortly afterwards it began to suffer a serious decline. Unfairly described as vicious and evil birds by early observers, goat farmers on the island of Guadalupe did not exactly have the nicest feelings towards the Caracara itself, and it was demanded that these birds would be killed on sight as they pose a significant threat to their goat herds, even though claims of Caracaras predating on live goats were greatly exaggerated, with individuals being seen next to dead goats almost certainly being of a scavenging rather than predatory nature. Tragically, it seems that the Guadalupe Caracara is one of the few species that were intentionally rendered extinct by humans, for great numbers of them were shot and poisoned during this time for these reasons. It should also be mentioned that feral populations of goats escaping from the farms on the island also contributed to the extinction of various endemic species due to habitat destruction caused by overgrazing, which may have also led to the accelerated decline of the Caracara due to likely food reduction and habitat loss. The last possible sighting of this bird was in 1903, with the species assumed to be completely gone by 1906. Today, only 35 physical specimens of this Caracara remain, including skins, skeletons and eggs, all held in museums. Hierrax is a species of extinct raptor I've discussed multiple times in previous videos. It was a gigantic eagle-like raptor with a 3-meter wingspan and a body size almost as great as the mighty Dagots Eagle from New Zealand. This huge predator dominated the island of Cuba for millennia, but it was not the only giant eagle-like bird of prey that roamed the islands of the Caribbean in the distant past. This is Titano Hierrax, another species of large bird of prey whose remains have been found across multiple islands in the Bahamas dating to the Pleistocene epoch. Recent studies on this extinct raptor based on its taxonomy have suggested that the Titano Hierrax was closely related to the family of raptors belonging to the genus known as Geranoatus, which includes species such as this Chilean blue eagle. Titano Hierrax was therefore a particularly large raptor for its kind, with the largest individuals weighing up to nearly 7.5 kilograms, roughly comparable to the mass of some of the larger eagle species alive today. This bird was also very hefty and powerful in its build, with fossils indicating it had more robustly built legs and talons than its modern relatives. Until as recently as about 17,000 years ago, Titano Hierrax was therefore likely an apex predator across many of these Bahamian islands, with its prey including a large species of terrestrial rodent known as a hoosha. It is believed that declines in the population of this rodent prey, along with changes in habitat and possibly even some human influence, is what led to the ultimate decline and extinction of this great bird. Another kind of large bird of prey endemic to the Caribbean during this time was Buteogallus borassi, or giant buteonine hawk. This particular species was endemic to the island of Cuba and lived until about as recently as the early Holocene, around 10,000 years ago or so. Known from various remains, this raptor is actually the most commonly found fossil accipitrid in the Quaternary deposits of Cuba itself, an area which is believed to have been a savanna-like environment back during this time. The closest living relative of Buteogallus borassi is believed to be this, the great black hawk, also being part of the larger genus known as Buteogallus itself. The extinct Buteogallus borassi, however, was at least a third larger than the largest great black hawk alive today, though for its size it had unusually gracile and slender features. It had legs that were proportionally as long or even longer than its modern relatives, and it also retained the large powerful feet and talons used for capturing and killing its prey. Rather incredibly, this bird would have shared its habitat throughout its ancient history with other even larger raptors that I have previously discussed in these videos, including Woodward's eagle, Hierrax, and the aforementioned Titano Hierrax. However, considering the abundance of Buteogallus borassi fossils in Cuban deposits, it seems that this was by far the most successful bird around, and its comparatively smaller size did not prevent this bird from being more adaptable and numerous than the other extinct giants it shared its habitat with. One can imagine a scenario such as this, where the smaller Buteogallus borassi harasses and mobs the much larger Hierrax in an aerial duel for straying too close to its nest or territory, just like how modern hawks and buzzards do so towards true eagles alive today. The remains of Butyrogalus boraci indicate that it was a highly aerial predator and would have almost certainly predated mostly on the small to medium-sized mammals present at the time, including rodents and small insectivores such as this Selenodon, which just so happened to be one of the few venomous mammals on Earth. This extinct raptor therefore was a true survivor, living in an island diverse with other much larger predatory birds, and yet still managing to be the most abundant by far. Around 40,000 years ago, in the late Pleistocene epoch, which is during the Ice Age, the Andean regions of South America were once home to an especially large and fearsome owl. The original remains found of this bird were found between 2009 and 2012 in the ravines of the Quebrada Chalan, which is in the Ecuadorian Andes. It was given the scientific name Asio ecuadoriensis. As part of the Asio or eared owl family, this makes this extinct bird closely related to modern species such as the long-eared owl pictured here. However, next to the comparatively dainty long-eared owl, this extinct owl was quite the giant. Larger individuals may have stood nearly 2.5 feet tall and had a wingspan of at least over 5 foot across, with a build and overall size comparable to that of a great horned owl from North America. Much like the living great horned owl, this giant Ecuadorian owl was itself an aggressive and powerful hunter, with its fossilized remains indicating it had longer and much more powerful legs and feet than modern Asio owl species. One particular site where this owl's bones have been found provides an even greater insight into the hunting prowess of this powerful bird. The site also contained the bones of various small mammals including shrews and rodents, as well as rabbits, but there are also numerous bones of other owl species found, including an American barn owl, burrowing owl, and pygmy owl, suggesting that all of these animals, including the other owls, were part of this owl's menu. Larger species of modern owls, particularly eagle owls and great horned owls themselves, are quite aggressive and are themselves known to occasionally predate smaller raptors, including other owl species. But to find evidence of an extinct owl hunting other species of owls in a specific location is quite extraordinary and shows that in terms of diet, this bird was not a fussy eater. In the present day, the African crowned eagle is one of the largest and arguably most powerfully built of all Africa's eagles. With a wingspan that can reach over 6 foot across, this formidable predator resides in forested and scrubland habitats on the continent, and is adapted for taking on particularly large prey items, some of which can reach over 4 times its own body weight. With its incredibly large and powerful legs and feet, along with huge talons capable of crushing the skull of its victims, this fierce and powerful species of forest eagle has been known to take on a wide range of larger animals, including fully grown bushbuck antelope and larger species of monkeys such as velvet monkeys. While today this bird can only be found in the wilds of Africa, there was a time when an extinct variant of this eagle thrived on the island of Madagascar, where it lived quite the similar lifestyle, but with very different contemporaries in its ecosystem. The Malagasi crowned eagle was an extinct species native to the island of Madagascar until around 1500 AD. It was comparable in appearance and size to the modern African crowned eagle, although some individuals may have been somewhat larger, with the largest ones being up to 7 kilos in weight. Living in the Malagasi forests on the island, this raptor was well adapted for life in the forest like its modern cousin, with relatively short broad wings and a long tail for a highly manoeuvrable flight style considering the bird's great size. Modern African crowned eagles, along with the somewhat similar looking harpy eagle, both feed heavily on primates, specifically monkeys, but in Madagascar monkeys were not present and instead were home to another species of familiar primate, the lemurs. It seems fairly certain that the Malagasi crowned eagle would have hunted lemurs as a large part of its diet, but back in prehistory, lemurs were even more diverse and strange than their modern counterparts. For example, there was a species that approached the size of and lived a similar lifestyle to the modern-day gorilla. It seems likely, however, that this great eagle would have still been a major threat to many of the species of diurnal lemurs, including some of the larger species we're familiar with today, as well as the juveniles of other larger extinct species. This extinct species of forest eagle would have likely hunted its prey in a very similar manner to its modern relative, likely ambushing its prey in the treetops using a fast and agile approach in the air, while using its enormous feet and talons to snatch and kill its prey incredibly quickly. With such size and power, this great raptor was almost certainly one of the apex predators on the island of Madagascar at the time, alongside the likes of the giant fossa and the voyer crocodile, all of which becoming the dominant carnivores on this isolated and strange ecosystem. One of the most recently extinct species on this list, alongside the Guadalupe Caracara, the laughing owl, was a species endemic only to the islands of New Zealand. This medium-sized species of owl had a brownish coloration, with yellowish markings and a pale greyish face, hence its other old-fashioned name, the white-faced owl. This species earned its name from the bizarre calls it used to make, often at night, with one source describing the calls as sounding like a loud cry made up of a series of dismal shrieks frequently repeated. The laughing owl was found across pretty much all of New Zealand, with there being a North Island subspecies and a South Island subspecies. Recent genetic analysis of preserved specimens indicates that the laughing owl was most likely close relatives of modern-day boobook owls. Laughing owls seem to prefer rocky, low-rainfall areas and forest districts, particularly when it came to breeding, which began in September or October. They often nested on rocky ledges or even on bare ground, where they would lay 2 white eggs as seen here by this preserved museum specimen. Due to their recent extinction, these birds are known from numerous preserved body and egg specimens in museum collections, and there are even photographs taken of these birds while they were still alive, particularly this one, which is of a South Island subspecies of laughing owl taken sometime between 1889 and 1910. Laughing owls were known to have quite a varied diet, and although they could fly well, they seemed to prefer to hunt on the ground and on foot compared to on the wing. They were known to feed on a wide range of ground-dwelling insects, such as weta and beetles, as well as various small reptiles such as geckos and tuatara, as well as frogs. They also hunted a wide range of smaller birds. When the Maoris arrived on the islands of New Zealand around 1100 AD, they brought with them Polynesian rats, which the owls quickly began to acquire a taste to. Until the arrival of these rodents, these owls would have only known a few species of bats as the only native species of mammals present in New Zealand. For centuries after this point, the laughing owl remained a relatively common species throughout both the North and Southern Islands of New Zealand, and by around the early 19th century, the species was still fairly abundant. That all changed when these new settlers began to bring along with them various invasive species that the owl was unprepared for. Invasive brown rats were more formidable and carnivorous than the Polynesian rats, and would have been a more challenging prey item for even an adult laughing owl to tackle. These rodents also heavily predated on owl eggs and youngsters, significantly denting their breeding populations. This was made even worse by other introduced species such as cats, ferrets and stoats, which would not only predate on the eggs and chicks, but even adult owls themselves given the chance. This intense competition and especially predation by these invasive species on the laughing owl, combined with a handful of individual specimens being killed for specimen collection by humans, is ultimately what led to these birds dying out. The last confirmed sighting of this bird in the wild was in 1914, after which it was almost certainly extinct. Undoubtedly one of, if not the best known of all the world's eagle species, the golden eagle is found across much of the northern hemisphere and is best known for its great size and regal beauty. With a wingspan that can reach over 7 foot across or more, this bird is beautifully adapted for soaring high over open and rugged terrain where it is both a formidable predator and scavenger. With massive talons that can rival the size of a lion's claws and feet that can squeeze with over 10 times the strength of a human hand, the golden eagle has one of, if not the most varied diets amongst all eagle species alive today, hunting everything from small insects to prey as big as deer. Found right across Europe, North America and Asia, this eagle is actually known by numerous subspecies or races if you will, and is one of the most successful species of eagles alive in the world today. There is evidence, however, that these birds were also very successful back in the distant past, specifically the Pleistocene epoch, where there were several other subspecies of golden eagle that were just as impressive if not more so than their modern counterparts. Remains assigned to a subspecies of golden eagle have been found in Lyco Cave in Crete and date from the Middle Pleistocene epoch. As well as remains being found here in Greece, there are also remains of ancient golden eagles being found in France, including some specimens that indicate that these paleo subspecies could grow especially large indeed. Perhaps even more interestingly, remains of a species of golden eagle have also been found in the La Brea tar pits in California, one of the richest sites of prehistoric animal remains in the world. Over the millennia, an almost immeasurable amount of animals and plants, including some of the world's most iconic species such as mammoths and saber-toothed cats, became trapped in naturally occurring tar here, where they ultimately perished and remained preserved for thousands of years. Some of these prehistoric golden eagles, including the ones found in France and also the ones found in California, appear to have been somewhat larger than some modern golden eagles. The Californian subspecies also seems to have slightly different proportions to modern golden eagles, with a comparatively heavier skull, larger wings, and shorter, stockier legs than modern golden eagles. As a whole, the golden eagle is an apex predator within its respected ecosystem, and not only hunts a wide range of prey, but is also known to aggressively interact with other carnivores within its habitat, including mammalian carnivores and other large birds of prey such as other eagles and vultures, most often when competing for food in harsh conditions, for example. This is especially interesting considering the golden eagles found in the La Brea tar pits, for they lived in an ecosystem absolutely filled with a variety of different carnivorous predators and scavengers, both avian and mammalian. These included the iconic saber-toothed cats, dire wolves as well as modern grey wolves, and various carnivorous birds we have discussed in previous videos, including the giant teratorns and the gigantic Woodward's eagle. All of which may have been a potential source of competition for food and resources for this giant variant of prehistoric golden eagle. One of the subjects of discussion in the previous video on this channel was about gigantic species of prehistoric owls, including Ornimegalonyx, a huge species from the island of Cuba, and Titopollens, a giant barn owl relative hailing from the Bahamas. However, it has recently come to my attention that there was yet another species of gigantic owl that lived in the distant past, for which I have not yet mentioned until now. An obscure species of prehistoric owl so gigantic that not only did it completely dwarf any modern species, but also challenged the size of extinct ones previously mentioned. Back in the 1970s, a series of bones were described from a formation in the southwestern United States, dating from the Pleistocene epoch. Amongst a range of other animals, some were certainly those belonging to a species of owl, though certainly not one from the modern era, because even by owl standards, they were enormous. The largest species of owls alive today, specifically the Eurasian eagle owl and the Blakiston's fish owl, can have a wingspan of at least over 6 foot across, but even these birds seem small compared to this extinct owl, which may have been at least an extra half the size or more. This species, therefore, would certainly be a contender for one of the largest owls that ever lived, with a body size potentially rivaling that of Ornimegalonyx, the giant Cuban owl, but with a much larger wingspan, and potentially even outclassing Titopollens, the giant barn owl, in overall size. Unfortunately, the remains of this bird appear to be very fragmentary, and there is little information about it considering it appears to be an undescribed species as of now, but there are some inferences that can be made. It is believed that this extinct bird was part of the owl family known as Strix, which includes modern large species such as the great grey owl, whom of which it may have resembled in life. Larger species of modern owls, including the great grey, along with great horned owls, and the various species of larger eagle owls, are all highly effective predators that are known to feed on a very wide range of prey. Some, like the Eurasian eagle owl for example, are capable of taking prey as big as small deer and foxes, using especially large and sharp talons, and possibly the strongest grip in the raptorial bird world aside from larger eagles, estimated to squeeze at over 400 pounds per square inch or so. Bearing this in mind, one shudders to imagine the potential power and hunting ability of this gigantic extinct owl, which itself possessed enormous talons and a gripping power in its raptorial feet that would definitely outclass any modern species. Based on the behaviour of its modern relatives, this gigantic owl was most likely a nocturnal hunter that swooped down on unsuspecting prey, even particularly large animals, including a species of long-nosed peccary that could be as large as a grown man. These animals had especially large and sharp canine teeth and an attitude to match considering their modern counterparts, but even they may not have been safe from this gigantic aerial hunter, which would have most likely shared another trait of modern owls, that is, silent flight, to take them by surprise. This immense owl would have filled a similar predatory niche in a nocturnal setting to its diurnal bird of prey contemporaries, including one in particular, the aforementioned Woodward's eagle, which would have been likely similar in size and may have at one point lived in the same place at the same time. So it seems that prehistoric North America, during the Ice Age at least, was roamed both day and night by gigantic prehistoric eagles and giant owls, as if all the other awe-inspiring creatures around at this time weren't enough. I have already made numerous videos detailing extinct birds of prey and owls, including numerous species that seem to be mostly unknown to many people. However, considering how diverse this family of birds have been throughout the course of history, and that numerous species are still being recognised even to this day, particularly in the case of species referred to ancient fossils, there are still many more species of extinct raptors that I can cover in yet another video. So, from two fossil species that might represent the smallest extinct bird of prey and owl species known to live, as well as among the earliest of their kind known to science, to a recently described species of vulture that roamed the Australian outback during the Ice Age, here's another 10 extinct birds of prey and owls you've never heard of. Primoptenyx is a species of extinct owl that lived in North America during the Eocene epoch, around 55 million years ago, which is not that long after the death of the non-avian dinosaurs, at least geologically speaking. It was only recently described in 2020 based on a partial skeleton found in Wyoming. This fossil shows clearly that this was quite a large species of owl, standing around 60 centimeters tall in life, which is interesting considering that most mammals and birds at the time were quite small, while this aerial hunter was comparable in size to some of the larger species of owl alive today, for instance the snowy owl, a large species found in the northern hemisphere. Just like modern larger owl species, Primoptenyx was armed with especially large and powerful feet, indicating it was a rapacious hunter that could tackle quite large prey items in relation to its size. In modern owl species, however, the talons on all of their toes are approximately the same size, whereas in this extinct owl, the talons on the second and hind toes of both feet were unusually enlarged, more like those seen on the feet of hawks and eagles, rather than most modern owl species. It is therefore theorized that this owl would have dispatched its prey using its feet in a much more hawk-like manner compared to what is seen in modern larger owls today. Although their taloned feet are still their primary physical weapons, modern owls are also frequently observed using their sharp beak to bite at the head and neck of their prey in order to dispatch it, especially with smaller prey once it's in their clutches, though it is believed that Primoptenyx may not have engaged in this behaviour so much, instead dispatching and then dismembering its prey in a more hawk-like manner. At the time, the area in which Primoptenyx lived was inhabited by various other small and strange creatures, including various rodents, tree-dwelling early primates, as well as early horses the size of spaniels, and it's possible that Primoptenyx may have hunted many of these animals, believed to be able to carry prey as large as a small rabbit. Ororistrix is yet another species of extinct owl hailing from North America, though from a much more recent period in Earth's history, the Pleistocene epoch to be precise. Ororistrix brea, also known as the La Brea owl, is in reference to the fact that many of this bird's remains have been found in the La Brea tar pits in California, a famous location containing many prehistoric animal remains as mentioned in previous videos, where a wide range of animals and plants became stuck in this naturally occurring bed of tar and became preserved for thousands of years. Ororistrix has also been found in other locations in North America, including in the upper Pleistocene asphalt deposits of the Carpinteria, also in California, as well as a few other locations in the southwestern United States and into Mexico, making it quite the widespread species alongside a few other smaller species of extinct owls. The La Brea owl was a large species, comparable to the largest owls alive today in size, though it had a comparatively more slender build and longer legs in proportion to its body, suggesting that it spent more time on or near the ground compared to other species, preferring open plain habitats than forested ones. Not much information or research has been published about this particular owl's dietary biology, so what kind of prey this owl actually hunted in life is open to speculation. Some paleoart depictions, including this one, portray the La Brea owl as a potential fish-eating species. There are actually a number of species of owl alive today that have taken to hunting fish as a large part of their diet, most notably the Pell's fishing owl, which lives in modern-day Africa, and the huge Blakiston's fish owl from Asia, which is also one of the largest owl species alive in the world today. Fish owl species like these tend to be large in size and have proportionally long legs in relation to their body, using their especially large and powerful feet and talons to seize fish, which they catch either by plunging directly into the water talons first, or by landing on the side of a river and snatching prey as it travels past. With some physical similarities with these modern owl species, and the fact that the La Brea owl lived alongside various waterways in the open plains in which it inhabited, it's not entirely unreasonable that this species may have indulged in hunting fish every now and again, but exactly how specialised this bird was for this kind of hunting technique or another different one still seems to be open for interpretation. Dryornis is an extinct species of gigantic New World vulture originating from Argentina. Also simply referred to as the Argentine vulture, Dryornis, whose name translates to tree bird, was first described in 1891 and is believed to have lived between the early Miocene and early Pliocene epochs, between 23 and 3.8 million years ago. Dryornis is currently recognised as being the largest known cathartiform except for the vulturine family known as pterotorns, a group that includes the infamous Argentavis. It may have had a wingspan reaching over 4 meters or more across, and it weighed a whopping 26 kilograms. For context, the largest bird of prey alive today, and also a potential close relative of this giant, the Andean condor, usually has a wingspan reaching over 3.2 meters across and weighing between 11 to 15 kilograms, making Dryonis an extra half the size of even this great bird. Just like these modern condors and vultures, Dryonis would have mostly been a scavenger in life, and would have likely behaved in much the same manner as well, soaring over great distances on its gigantic wings, scanning the ground for dead animals to feed on. Its ecosystem was home to a range of unique species, including gigantic armadillo relatives, carnivorous marsupials, and other mammals including Chapel melania, a relative of modern-day raccoons, the size of a black bear. Based on the behaviour of modern-day vulture and condor species, it seems to be almost certain that Dryonis would have used its huge size and aggression to dominate and drive away smaller mammalian competitors on a carcass. Though it is also possible that alongside other giant vulture species in South America, including the aforementioned Argentavis, Dryonis may have also been an occasional predator of very small animals as well. Ogygopteryx is perhaps the oldest known owl species known in the fossil record, living during the Paleocene epoch, around 57 million years ago. It is known from a single fossil located in Colorado in the USA, and is only known from a single species, Ogygopteryx wetmorei. This species lived at a time where the earth was covered mostly with forest, and small animals were abundant, especially on the ground, in the wake of the dinosaurs' extinction. With so much prey running around, particularly in the form of small mammals and reptiles, it's no doubt that this particular species, and eventually its progeny, were specifically adapted to take advantage of this ecological niche, which was now available for them to fulfill. The smallest known species of diurnal raptor alive today are the black-thighed and collared falconets. These birds, the tiniest of all the falcon family, are barely the size of a sparrow, scarcely weighing heavier than 55 grams and having a body less than 15 centimeters or 6 inches from beak to tail. The smallest of all living owl species is the elf owl from North America. These diminutive birds are themselves around the same size as the previously mentioned falconets, barely 15 centimeters long and having an average body weight of just over 40 grams. It is truly extraordinary how these species can become so tiny and yet retain many of the behavioural and physical traits that their larger cousins have, though the fossil record indicates that this is not the first time that this has happened in the bird of prey and owl family tree. These are two species both dating from the Eocene epoch, one representing a tiny species of bird of prey known as Parvulli venata, and an early species of tiny owl, Eostrix. Both of these species date from a fairly early stage in the Eocene epoch, roughly 55 million years ago, and their size in fact is even more diminutive than the previously mentioned species of today. Parvulli venata was an ancient relative of modern falcons and the tiny falconets, whom it very closely resembled in life, and only reached around 2/3 the size of modern-day black-thighed and collared falconets. Likewise, Eostrix gulutai, the tiny Eocene owl, was also even smaller than the modern contemporary, the elf owl. Just like their modern counterparts, these two even tinier prehistoric species likely spent most of their time feeding on insects, which were in abundance during this time in Earth's history considering how warm and forested it was, though they may have occasionally tackled very small reptiles and mammals given the chance. Australia currently has no vulture species present on the continent, but we now know that at least one vulture species did inhabit the continent, at least in the distant past. Skeletal material discovered in Australia dating to the Pleistocene epoch were described initially in 1905 as likely being the remains of a species of eagle. However, upon closer examination of these bones, specifically at the leg and foot anatomy of this extinct bird, it soon became clear that the tarsometatarsus, or lower leg bone of this bird, was not very robust in comparison to that of birds of prey like larger eagles that do actively dispatch larger prey, and would have lacked the musculature or strength to do so in real life. Along with other features identified from the bones, it has only been recently that this bird has been identified as not a species of eagle, but in fact an Old World vulture. It has since been given the scientific name cryptogyps, a reference to its mistaken identity. Scaling of its remains indicate that this vulture was not particularly large, not as big as some other species mentioned on this list, but still somewhat bigger than the largest bird of prey alive in Australia today, the wedge-tailed eagle. Cryptogyps may have had a wingspan of roughly 2 meters or more across, and they were quite robust even for a vulture, though at the same time it was quite a lightweight bird, weighing around 4 to 6 kilograms, which is comparable to the wedge-tailed eagle, but not as heavy as large Old World vultures alive today like the griffon vulture, for example. During the Pleistocene era, this extinct vulture lived alongside a range of bizarre and gigantic Australian megafauna, ranging from the gigantic wombat-like Diprotodon to gigantic kangaroos and of course the infamous Megalania, a huge fearsome relative of modern-day Komodo dragons. There was also another large bird of prey, the predatory Dinatoatus, which itself was related to modern-day Old World vultures, but lived more like a large eagle. With so many megafauna around, including some especially fearsome predators, it seems there was no shortage of carrion in which cryptogyps could feed on, fulfilling a scavenging role much like modern species of Old World vultures in the Serengeti today. Flores is located in Indonesia amongst an archipelago of islands including the famous Komodo Islands. This isolated and tropical location was historically home to a range of unusual animals, including yet another species of prehistoric vulture. The vulture species endemic to the Flores Islands belong to the genus known as Trigonoceps, meaning that this species of extinct vulture was very closely related to the modern-day white-headed vulture, which also belongs to this genus. However, the modern-day white-headed vulture is only found across Africa, and is itself a critically endangered species nowadays. The fact that it had such a close relation living on the Flores Island in Indonesia suggests that this particular genus of vulture was possibly even more diverse across the southern hemisphere throughout ancient history. During much of the Pleistocene epoch, this particular species of vulture, whom may have resembled and behaved almost exactly like the modern-day white-headed vulture, was a primary scavenger on the island, with wingspans sometimes reaching nearly 8 foot across. The island ecosystem in which it lived was home to a range of bizarre creatures. During this time, as still is the case today, the island was home to Komodo dragons as well as other islands nearby, who were both active predators and scavengers. There was another species of extinct bird living here, however, that outclassed possibly even the vulture and the Komodo dragon in certain aspects. A gigantic species of marabou stork, which could have stood nearly 6 foot tall and had a wingspan exceeding 3 meters across, making for an especially formidable competitor. Possibly even stranger still was a species of prehistoric human which lived here, Homo floresiensis. This species of prehistoric human would have barely stood up to 4 foot tall, hence their common nickname, the real-life hobbits. Despite their diminutive size, however, they were still formidable, with evidence of stone tools and blades, alongside evidence that they may have hunted dwarf elephants on the island. One can imagine, however, many of the gigantic inhabitants of this island giving these tiny humans a hard time, especially in contests over hunted kills and other carrion, including with the gigantic marabou storks and the Flores vulture itself. Carakara major was a species of prehistoric Carakara from the Pleistocene epoch, representing possibly one of, if not the largest of its kind. It was named as a new species in 2013, and it lived throughout South America, with its remains specifically being found in Uruguay. Numerous fossils assigned to Carakaras of different species being found in South America indicates that during these prehistoric times, Carakaras were seemingly even more diverse than they are today, but in terms of sheer size, this particular species was a cut above the rest. It is believed that the largest Caracara major individuals may have reached at least up to 4,000 grams in weight, whereas the modern crested Caracara weighs around 1,348 grams on average, making this extinct bird at least 3 to 3.5 times the size of its modern relative, and possibly representing one of the largest prehistoric species in the Falconidae family tree. However, despite its size, this gigantic Caracara seems to have retained its flight capabilities, unlike another species of extinct Caracara we have covered in a previous video, the Jamaican Caracara, which is believed to have been either near flightless or completely flightless. Caracaras as a species are known to be highly versatile and intelligent birds, being unusually social for a raptor, and being adept at both hunting and catching prey with their powerful taloned feet, but also being adept scavengers of carrion. It seems therefore that Caracara major may have both hunted and scavenged prey in much the same manner as its modern relatives, just on a larger scale, with the presence of large megafauna and therefore larger amounts of food, likely being the main contributing factor in enabling this bird to reach such a great size. However, since the discovery and description of Caracara major in 2013, a new fossil taxon of Caracara belonging to the same genus as this one has also been found in Uruguay since, and it has been described to be larger than even Caracara major itself. The tiny island of Reunion is situated in the Indian Ocean, near the much larger and more famous island of Madagascar, where it was once home to a small species of falcon known as the Reunion kestrel. Endemic only to this tiny island, this species was part of a group of numerous other kestrels which radiated and diversified across different locations in the Indian Ocean. With a wingspan of around 70 centimeters, it likely closely resembled other kestrel species in size and coloration, including the familiar common kestrel. It had comparatively more rounded wings than many other kestrels, however, making it a more maneuverable fly in its forested habitat. This species is well recognized from subfossil bones located on the island, as well as writings from Sieur de Bois, a French traveller who observed this bird alive and published these writings in 1674. As a small species of falcon, this bird fed mainly on other smaller birds, but it also fed largely on insects, as well as a small reptile endemic to the island, the Reunion Island day gecko, though Dubois mentioned that despite its small size, this raptor would sometimes attack domestic chickens. The exact cause of extinction of the Reunion Island kestrel is somewhat mysterious, as introduced predators were not present at the time that this bird was last observed, with even invasive species like rats posing relatively little problem for these birds. While this species was considered to be a pest by some at the time, as they did occasionally hunt poultry, it seems also unlikely that persecution was the main cause of extinction, as other species present on the island were also heavily persecuted, and yet they still survive to this day. Whatever the exact cause or causes of extinction, the Reunion Island kestrel seems to have died out around the year 1700. Next to the island of Reunion, however, is another tiny island, the island of Mauritius, which is home to another species of small falcon with a more positive continuation to its species story. Mauritius is itself the famous former home of a very infamous extinct species, the dodo, a large flightless species of ground-dwelling pigeon which itself died out around the time, if not before, the Reunion kestrel itself died out on the nearby island. Mauritius has its own kestrel species endemic to its land, however, the Mauritius kestrel, which is slightly smaller than the Reunion kestrel was, but otherwise is physically very similar. This particular species of kestrel had already suffered a serious population decline during the 18th century as a result of deforestation and intense cyclones. However, during the 1950s and 60s, it suffered an even more serious decline as a result of indiscriminate DDT use, a type of pesticide, as well as the introduction of various invasive species including rats, mongooses, crab-eating macaques, and possibly the most serious of all, feral cats. These invasive species contributed to the decline by competing for the kestrel for habitat and resources, as well as sometimes actively predating the kestrels and their eggs themselves, particularly in the case of mongooses and feral cats. The population of this bird hit an all-time low in 1974, with only 4 individuals recorded on the island, making this species the rarest bird in the world at the time. To prevent the species from dying out, a wildlife sanctuary was set up on the island and a serious conservation effort began to take place. It turns out that alongside other kestrel species, the Mauritius kestrel is capable of starting a new clutch of eggs if the first clutch fails. A technique known as double clutching was quickly implemented to boost the population as fast as possible, where a clutch of eggs was located and then removed to be raised in captivity, while the diet of the kestrels themselves was being supplemented while the second clutch in the wild was being raised, thus averting any potential negative impacts on the wild population. Thanks to these intensive conservation efforts, the population of Mauritius kestrels has been steadily increasing over the last few decades, and they have since been moved from critically endangered to endangered on the species conservation list. There are currently around 300 to 400 individuals alive in Mauritius today, which, although not seeming to sound that much, is still an important increase in population considering these birds live on such a tiny island, but conservation efforts are still in place to try and maintain and increase the population even further. It just goes to show that with proper knowledge and quick intervention, these species can be saved from the brink of extinction. Birds of prey and owls have a long and interesting history, and I've already made numerous videos on this channel explaining the more popular and also the lesser known species. And after some further online research, it turns out there are many more interesting species that I can dedicate a video about. So, from a bizarre family of stilt-legged owls living on the Hawaiian Islands, to prehistoric vulture species known from exquisitely preserved remains dating from the Ice Age, here is yet another 10 extinct birds of prey and owls you've probably never heard of before. The harriers are a family of hawk-like birds of prey found across both the northern and southern hemisphere. These medium-sized, day-flying raptors are typically elegant in build with long wings and tail feathers, and they have a characteristically buoyant, maneuverable flight style, usually hunting prey including smaller birds and mammals. In one of my previous videos, I covered the Isles' harrier, possibly the best known and largest of all extinct species, which originally lived in New Zealand. There was, however, another extinct species of harrier, albeit smaller in size, that was associated with an island ecosystem, though this species hails not from New Zealand, but from Hawaii. One of the few harrier species known to be specialised for living in enclosed forested habitats, this was the wood harrier, also known as the mime harrier. This relatively small raptor lived on the Hawaiian islands of Oahu and Molokai until as recently as the late Holocene. As its name suggests, the wood harrier was adapted for living in the enclosed forested habitats of these island ecosystems, which is quite different compared to most modern harrier species alive today, which typically live in more exposed habitats. For example, the hen harrier, found here in Britain and Europe, is most commonly associated living in open moorland habitats, often adjacent to mountainous areas. The slightly larger marsh harrier is more frequently observed in lowland areas, though they still seem to prefer relatively open wetland ecosystems as their preferred haunts. When compared to modern harrier species, the wood harrier was a small raptor, with even the smaller Hyde and Montagu's harriers alive today outsizing it. When species inhabiting an island are smaller than their continental relatives, this phenomenon is known as insular dwarfism, where restrictions in the environmental range of island habitats combined with a reduction in resources makes it advantageous for certain species to become smaller over time, which is the complete opposite of island gigantism, which was the case for the aforementioned Isles's harrier, which became an island giant. The wood harrier, with its relatively small body and short wings compared to modern harrier species, was well adapted for flying through its forested home, possibly resembling a true hawk or exhibitor more than a harrier in life. Before humans first arrived onto these islands, there were no mammals present in the ecosystem in which this raptor lived, and its diet consisted mostly of large insects and smaller birds, particularly species such as this Hawaiian honeycreeper. The extinction of the wood harrier is suspected to have been the result of numerous causes, including habitat degradation caused by human activity, along with the introduction of invasive species, notably the Pacific rat. Another potential contributing factor to the decline of this bird, along with other species, was the presence of avian diseases transmitted via mosquito bites. Eventually, as a tragic result of these environmental changes, the wood harrier eventually died out, one of the most recent extinctions on this list. The London Clay Formation in Essex, England, contains fossil remains of species dating to the Eocene epoch, around 54 to 55 million years ago. I have in fact already mentioned this formation in a previous discussion about Daniel's raptor, a species related to modern falcons, which is found in this formation. It seems, however, that Daniel's raptor was not alone in this ancient ecosystem, with another predatory bird species described in 2022 based on these fossil remains uncovered, which turned out to be the partial skeleton of an ancient owl species. Euprigi glox, whose name translates as the Euprasian owl, has also recently been assigned to remains uncovered in North America, and its genus now contains 2 recognized species. Even by owl standards, this owl species was tiny, with the nominate species in this genus being comparable in size to a Eurasian pygmy owl. The second species was even smaller than even the elf owl of today, making it possibly the smallest known species of owl extinct or living. Interestingly, examination of this owl species' neck vertebrae, specifically the axis and atlas at the top of the spine, suggests that Euprigi glox did not have the same level of rotational head mobility as modern owl species, which can turn their head around 270 degrees. This implies that the extra neck mobility of owls was an adaptation that developed later on as species continued to diversify. It has been suggested that Euprigi glox was mostly a diurnal species, unlike the more nocturnal species we're more familiar with today, and considering the tiny size of this species, they may have hunted mostly large insects, similar to modern elf owls and long-whiskered owlets. The Eocene was a time where the Earth was especially hot and tropical, with forests covering much of the globe, therefore providing plenty of insect prey for these tiny owls and their relatives to feed upon. The Messel Pit Formation in Germany is another fossil location I have mentioned before, for it is well known for exquisitely preserved fossils of extinct animals living during the Eocene epoch. One of these extinct species is yet another kind of falcon relative I've discussed beforehand, Raptor, and as was the case in the previous entry on this list, it turns out that this early falcon relative was not alone in this ancient ecosystem, for it too lived alongside an early species of prehistoric owl, known as Paleoglox. While not quite as small as the aforementioned Gepregiglox, Paleoglox was still relatively small for an owl, comparable in size to the modern-day Eurasian little owl. The Paleoglox genus is now recognized to contain at least 2 species, with their remains being found in 2 separate European locations, one in France and one in the Messel Pit Formation in Germany, including some stunningly well-preserved fossils of this owl. They include the entire skeleton of this bird with the exception of the skull, and even fossilized impressions of the bird's plumage itself. Examination of these remains have revealed interesting details about this owl's anatomy. For example, close examination on the feather impressions of the fossil shows that the plumage on this owl's body included feathers that were unusually long and ribbon-like, that also lacked the barbs present on other feathers on the body, including the primaries on the wings. These are very similar to the feathers used by other bird species alive today that are used for courtship and display, but is not usually observed in owls, especially nocturnal species, which is part of the reason why this lineage of extinct owls has been hypothesized to be mostly diurnal in nature, as these visual structures would make more sense to be visible in the daylight than if they were being used for display in darkness. Another anatomical feature that indicates the primitive nature of this extinct owl is the lack of a bony arch in its foot as present in living owls, suggesting that the gripping ability or strength of its feet wasn't as pronounced as modern owl species, as the bony arch helps to strengthen the feet when grabbing onto prey. Even so, much like many of the smaller diurnal owls hunting today, Paleoglox would have still hunted a variety of small animals, including rodents, lizards, smaller birds and larger insects, though as was the case with these other more primitive Eocene owls, it was still quite unusual and different compared to modern owl species. As we have covered with the previously mentioned Eocene owl species, there appears to be a common trend where some of the earliest known members in this lineage are tiny in size, being comparable to or even smaller than the smallest owls known today. This correlates to how many species in the wake of the non-avian dinosaurs' extinction were unusually small, along with the fact that at this time the Earth was heavily covered with forest, making it further advantageous to be smaller in stature, which applied to most vertebrate animals alive at this time. It may be quite surprising then that the next species on this list, which is another kind of owl, is not only the oldest known species of owl found in the fossil record so far, but is also much larger compared to the previously mentioned species on this list. Discovered in northwestern France, Beru ornis is recognized as belonging to the taxonomic owl family known as Sophiornithidae, translating as the wisdom birds. It lived as far back as the mid to late Paleocene epoch, approximately between 57 and 60 million years ago, between 6 and 9 million years after the death of the non-avian dinosaurs, though its kind may have persisted into the later Eocene. Beru ornis completely dwarfed any of the previously mentioned early Eocene owls I've discussed before, being around the same size as a Eurasian eagle owl, which is one of the largest species of owls alive today, with the larger individuals having a wingspan over 2 meters across and weighing over 4 kilograms. Beru ornis was formally described and named in 1994 and is so far the only recognised species within its genus. The fossilised remains assigned to this bird include some well-preserved leg bones, including in particular a very stout tarsa metatarsus, which is a longer bone in the lower leg of birds and reptiles. Examination of this bone in species such as Beru ornis and its relatives shows a gradual progression where owls begin to develop a more semizygodactyl foot over time, that is 2 toes pointing forward and 2 pointing back, though one of the outer toes can be moved to form a more anisodactyl foot shape if necessary. This adaptation would further assist the owls in their ability to grab hold of struggling prey using their powerful taloned feet, and considering how huge and fearsome Beru ornis must have been in its natural habitat, it was likely one of the top predators in its local ecosystem at the time. Located in the Sargasso Sea within the Atlantic Ocean, the archipelago of Bermuda has a land area of around 21 square miles. It has a tropical climate, having warm winters and hot summers, and over the centuries it has been known to inhabit a variety of different species, including numerous birds, though some of them are now sadly extinct. One of the most obscure and mysterious of these species is the so-called Bermuda hawk, a bird of prey which was endemic to this island and was the sole member of its genus Bermutio. Although this extinct raptor has been referable to the subfamily known as the Butios, the exact taxonomic relationship this bird has with that group is still somewhat open for debate, likely due to the fact that fossil materials linked to this species are rare to say the least. Considerable size variation noted in these limited remains suggests sexual dimorphism as present in other birds of prey, and it has been suggested that this raptor may have been mostly a bird hunter, as fellow avians present on the island may have provided a suitable food source. This extinct raptor has been assigned to a variety of sightings made on the island in 1603 by Diego Ramirez, who quoted on their seeming indifference to human visitors to the island. The species was said to be not present on the island in 1623, with Captain John Smith stating that there were only migrant raptors on Bermuda. The exact extinction date of the Bermuda hawk is not currently known, but it is assumed that they would have died out following the human settlement on the island in the 17th century, followed by hunting and the introduction of invasive species. For our next entry on this list, we're going to be returning to the islands of Hawaii. As it turns out, the wood harrier wasn't the only predatory bird patrolling the isolated forests of these islands. 4 Hawaiian islands, Maui, Kauai, Oahu and Molokai, were once home to 4 separate species of owl belonging to the genus known as Grallistrix, though these were among the most peculiar looking owls the world has ever seen. These are most commonly referred to as the stilt owls, since their genus name Grallistrix roughly translates to owls on stilts, which is rather fitting considering the unusually terrestrial nature of these birds, along with, most obviously, their unusually long legs, possibly the longest in relation to their body of any owl species. Numerous owl species, both living and extinct, have quite unusually long legs for their size, and therefore spend a lot of time hunting on the ground, most notably of course the tiny burrowing owl, which hunts for small terrestrial prey in the Americas. On the other end of the scale there is of course Ornimegalonyx, a monstrous species from the island of Cuba, which I've covered many times before, a gigantic and ferocious avian predator of large terrestrial quarry. In relation to their body size, the unusual-looking Hawaiian stilt owls may have had proportionally even longer legs than either of these species, and while they were nowhere near as large and as powerful as the infamous Ornimegalonyx, they could still get quite sizable by owl standards. The largest of the 4 species, the Molokai stilt owl, was around 60 centimeters tall, comparable to some larger species alive today, such as the Ural or Great Horned owls. These long and powerful legs were certainly well adapted for speedy walking or even running, and catching prey on or near the ground in thick undergrowth would have been an effective hunting technique amongst these owls. However, despite their unusually long legs and relatively short wings, the stilt owls were still capable of flying. Also, as a brief side note, you can't tell me that these owls don't look like Stolas from Hell of a Boss. Honestly, the resemblance is quite uncanny. Being well adapted for a terrestrial hunting lifestyle, the stilt owls likely utilized a hunting strategy including stalking through the forest floor and ambushing smaller prey with a quick pounce, seizing it in their taloned feet, including smaller birds such as the Hawaiian honeycreepers. There were other unusual species sharing the owl's habitat, for example the Molokai flightless ibis, which could grow over 1/2 meter long and would have probed through the undergrowth with its long curved beak, fulfilling a similar ecological niche to the New Zealand kiwi bird. Much of what we know about this unusual family of owls comes from subfossil remains discovered on each of these Hawaiian islands. None of these birds were ever seen alive and are presumed to have died out around some point in the later Holocene. The kestrels are a group of small falcons known for their striking coloration as well as their typical hunting behaviour including hovering in mid-air. There are around 14 living species of falcon assigned to the name kestrel, all of which come from the Old World, with one exception, that being of course the tiny American kestrel. There was, however, another species of falcon known as a kestrel that inhabited the New World, though it is known only from the island of Cuba. The Cuban kestrel has been described from various fossil remains located across the island of Cuba itself, indicating it was once a particularly common species here. It was small in size for a falcon, being intermediate between the sizes of the modern-day merlin and the American kestrel, which are the two smallest falcon species alive today in North America, though are not the smallest falcon species in the world, that title going to the diminutive falconets. However, the most distinctive physical trait of this extinct species of kestrel was its unusually long legs, possibly the longest in relation to its body size of any species in the falcon genus. As is the case with other unusually long-legged species mentioned on this list, this suggests that the Cuban kestrel had an unusually terrestrial style of hunting, possibly chasing prey on foot, not unlike modern caracaras, albeit on a much smaller scale. Modern species, including the aforementioned American kestrel, are pretty tenacious hunters themselves despite their small size, capturing small mammals and birds almost the same weight as themselves, as well as larger insects, and it can be assumed that the Cuban kestrel was likely quite similar, except of course it captured more of its prey on the ground, and since there were no mammalian predators on the island at the time, with the exception of small insectivorous species, it is possible that the Cuban kestrel may have nested on the ground, or in rock crevices. It has been assumed that the terrestrial habits of this tiny falcon may have been its undoing, as when humans eventually arrived to the island of Cuba, this small raptor may have been vulnerable to their activities, including fires being spread by Paleo-Indians at the time. It is uncertain of the exact date of this species' extinction, though it has been assumed that this falcon died out during the 17th century, following the European colonization of the island. V. gornis lived in what is now South America during the early Miocene epoch, between 23 and just under 16 million years ago. It is known from numerous fossilized material, and 3 species within this genus are currently recognized. The skull and postcranial morphology of this bird are pretty well preserved, and are very similar in appearance to the skulls of the modern-day laughing falcon and forest falcon, showing that this bird was an early member of this subfamily, known as the Herpetotherines, which are themselves part of the Falconidae family. The Herpetotherinae subfamily contains two genera, the laughing falcon pictured here and the forest falcons, both of which are now found in South America and are basal to other falconid subfamilies where they split off just over 30 million years ago. Although they are still part of the Falconiformes order, their habitat and appearance are quite different compared to what we typically think of when discussing more famous members of the falcon family. Based on the fossilized remains of this extinct species, it seems fairly certain that anatomically speaking, Thegornis was physically very similar to modern-day laughing and forest falcon species, adapted for living a very similar kind of lifestyle in a heavily forested ecosystem. Unlike most species of falcon, which are easily identifiable by their long pointed wings, rapid flight and preference to flying in open spaces, these forest-dwelling falconids have proportionally shorter, more rounded wings and long tail feathers, giving them a flight style and aerial silhouette much more like that of true hawks or accipiters. This means the forest falcons and the laughing falcon are better adapted for agile flight in thick cover instead of outright speed and power in the open air, as is the case with other more famous falcon species. Like all diurnal birds of prey, forest falcons have exceptionally sharp vision for locating their quarry, and they also have surprisingly good hearing, albeit nowhere near to the same level as owls. These agile and resourceful hunters are capable of catching prey both on foot and on the wing, often launching surprise attacks and rapid pursuits on prey from a perching position, similar to how a goshawk or sparrowhawk might ambush its prey. They are known to hunt a wide range of species, including various mammals, reptiles including lizards and snakes, and, as seen in the case of this collared forest falcon, birds up to their own body size. Based on what we know about the life history of both forest falcons and the modern laughing falcon, it seems that Thegornis and its relatives likely lived a very similar lifestyle to these birds. The fish eagles and sea eagles have quite a long and interesting taxonomic history. Within the bird of prey family Accipitridae, there are two genera which are recognized by these names. One of these, that contains the most famous species, is Haliaetus. These include some of the largest and most formidable eagle species on the planet, most notably the American bald eagle, the Eurasian white-tailed sea eagle filmed here, the Pallas's fish eagle, and the heaviest of them all, the gigantic Steller's sea eagle. The second genus is known as Ichthyophaga, which contains 6 species of eagles and is closely related, albeit separate, from Haliaetus. Probably the two most notable species contained within this genus are the African fish eagle and the white-bellied sea eagle, which is found in Southeast Asia and Australia. Haliaetus is assumed to be one of the oldest genera of living bird species, and there is in fact fossilized material uncovered revealing some interesting details about this lineage of raptors. The Jebel Quatrani Formation is an Oligocene fossil deposit located in Egypt and dates to around 33 million years ago. A well-preserved tarso-metatarsus, or lower leg bone, has been recovered from this formation, and its general appearance and morphology is very much like that of modern sea eagles in the Haliaetus genus, possibly representing one of the earliest known remains of a species within this genera. This genus of birds was definitely present and much more diverse by the Middle Miocene, between 12 and 16 million years ago. The taxonomic relationships of this genera compared to other members in the Accipitridae family is somewhat less clear, though they do have some physical similarity to larger Old World vulture species, as well as there being genetic evidence pointing them as closer relatives to kites and butios than true eagles or the genus Aquila. The La Brea tar pits in California is a formation that probably doesn't need too much introduction, as it contains the preserved remains of some of the most famous prehistoric species, including mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and dire wolves. It also contains the remains of some of the most impressive prehistoric predatory bird species, which I have covered before in previous videos. These include the gigantic Dagots Eagle, the immense Teratons, Ororistrix, the La Brea Owl, and even an Ice Age variant of the iconic Golden Eagle, along with numerous species still alive today. There were, however, other more peculiar species that are less well known in comparison, in particular two species of vulture, one of which is Neophrontops, or simply referred to as the American neophron, and the other is referred to as Neogyps, although it is also sometimes referred to as the errant eagle, for although it is still considered to be a species of vulture, it may have appeared more like an eagle in life. Both of these species are known from exquisitely well-preserved remains that have been recovered from the tar pits, with their skeletons remaining intact in stunning detail. Neither of these vultures are particularly impressive in terms of size in comparison to some of the previously mentioned species from this formation, but that is not necessarily what makes them so unique. What is unusual about these two species, however, is the fact that they are both Old World vultures, even though they clearly live in the Americas. Although both the Old World and New World vultures fulfill very similar ecological roles, they are in fact quite distinct, with the New World vultures believed to be closer to species like the cranes, and living of course in the New World, whereas the Old World vultures are believed to be closer to species such as the eagles, and live of course in the Old World. However, despite this being said, it turns out that earlier on in history, possibly when continents were slightly closer together than they are today, Old World vultures did in fact end up colonizing the New World, and were surprisingly widespread across North America in particular until around 11,000 years ago. The American neophron belonged to the vulture subfamily known as Chipetinae, which includes species such as the modern Lammergeier. And the errant eagle, or Neogyps as it is referred to, is also believed to be a close relative of this subfamily, and may have also resembled the modern Lammergeier in many ways, both in behaviour and appearance. Vultures are, of course, for the most part, scavenging in nature, and each species, whether Old World or New World, fulfills slightly different scavenging niches based on its morphology. The American neophron has quite a long and narrow beak, suggesting a feeding style similar to that of both American black vultures, and maybe also like that of African Old World species, such as the Egyptian and hooded vultures. In contrast, Neogyps has been hypothesized to be what is known as a ripper scavenger, one of the first vultures to arrive at a carcass and tearing it open to feed on what was inside as well as the hide itself, more like larger robust species such as griffin vultures, for example. During the Pleistocene era, with so much megafauna to feed on, and numerous predatory species with leftovers to pick at, these unique Old World vulture species, along with so many other carnivorous scavenging birds, diversified and thrived across the North American continent, with naturally occurring death traps such as the La Brea tar pits clearly attracting a lot of attention, providing a valuable insight into the life history of these extraordinary birds.